I'm working on transforming this entire island in my brand new hardcore world. I already have a small starter area established, but in this video, I'm taking things to the next level by expanding the area into a full-on village. The first thing I want to build is an epic windmill, but I'm super low on resources, so I planted a few spruce and dark oak trees. While we wait for them to grow, let's head down to the mine to look for a geode, as we're also going to need a bunch of smooth basalt. I knew there was one down here, but it still took me like 10 minutes to finally track it down. After mining a few stacks of smooth basalt, I also grabbed some calcite while I had the chance. With those resources in hand, I made my way back to the surface. Back at our house, I began crafting materials that we're going to need to build the windmill. And I want to use some lecterns in the build, which is going to require a lot of leather, so I took a quick break from crafting to breed all of the cows inside of our barn. I noticed all of the trees had grown, so I took a few minutes to chop all of them down. While I was in choppy mode, I also cut down some of the oak trees in the nearby forest. I do want a lot of the logs to be stripped though, so I decided to just strip them down right now to make my life easier later when I'm building the windmill. After that, I went back to the barn to breed the cows again, and while I was here, I also sheared all of the white sheep for their wool. That's pretty much all the resources we need, but before we can actually make the windmill, I of course need a spot to build it. To solve this issue, I got to work terraforming the landscape to make some room for it. And because I can't help myself, I also extended our pathway over to the build site as well. Now that we have a suitable spot to build the windmill, I bred the cows one last time and then unalived all of the adults to get a bunch of leather. Using the leather, I crafted books, which I then turned into bookshelves, and then finally, I made all the lecterns. And with that, we now have all the materials we're going to need to build the windmill. Without wasting any time, I got straight to building. I first created the foundation out of a combination of deep slate and smooth basalt, and then built up the main tower using spruce wood. And I made use of all the lecterns to create a really neat trim which helps divide up the different sections. To cap off the tower, I built a simple peaked roof using dark oak and deep slate. Last but not least, I added the windmill blades to complete the build, and I have to say, it's looking absolutely awesome. To give the windmill some functionality, I want to hide 2 moss farms inside, one for regular moss and one for pale moss. I already have some pale moss that I got from a wandering trader, but I still need regular moss, so it's time for an adventure to find a lush cave. Before heading out, I enchanted a brand new pickaxe and got Silk Touch, Efficiency 4, and Unbreaking 3. And since I now have Silk Touch, I also put together an ender chest, which should really help with our inventory situation. With that in hand, I finally set off in the search of a lush cave. Along the way, I came across a village where I grabbed a few sweet berries since I don't have any yet. I also used my shears to gather a bunch of ferns, which will be great for decorating our base. After searching through a few caves, I finally found one with a lush cave inside of it. I gathered a decent amount of moss blocks, and then also took the opportunity to collect a bunch of rooted dirt as well. And thanks to my new ender chest, I was able to bring back way more blocks than I normally would have been able to. With everything I needed, I made my way back home, organized my items, and here's a look at all the goodies I got. Now that I have both types of moss, I got to work crafting all the redstone materials I'll need for the farms. We need a bunch of different components like hoppers, repeaters, and copper bulbs. I also made a quick stop at our dock to grab some water buckets, then headed over to the blacksmith to pick up a couple of lava buckets. With that, we have almost everything that we need except for sticky pistons. Unfortunately, I have 0 slime which I need to craft them, so it's time for another adventure to find a swamp biome. Along the way, I found a bunch of surface level coal, so I took the opportunity to mine it all. As I continued my journey, I bumped into a shipwreck where I found a treasure map and a bunch of other great loot. And not too far from there, I spotted a second shipwreck, so I went full pirate mode and looted that one as well. After that, I used the treasure map I found to locate the buried treasure. I wasn't expecting to get this many resources on my way to the swamp, but I'm definitely not complaining. And it didn't stop there since I found a savannah village next, where I stole all of their emeralds as well as their bell. I then took a quick break from my raiding spree to admire a cute panda that I spotted nearby. And the panda was right next to a mangrove biome, so I took the chance to collect a few stacks of mud blocks while I was there. And after adventuring a bit further, I finally found a swamp biome. While I wait for nightfall so that I can hunt down some slimes, I decided to collect a stack of blue orchids as well as lily pads. Might as well make the most of my time while I'm here. Once the sun set, I spent the night killing slimes with my looting 3 sword. It was a bit dangerous at times with the amount of other hostile mobs spawning, but I was cautious and made my way all the way through the night. And by sunrise, I had a little over 2 stacks of slime balls. That should be more than enough, but I can't help myself, so I continued exploring for a bit longer. I found some rose bushes, so I grabbed a few since I don't actually have any yet. I then spotted one of the newest additions to the game, a pale garden. I went over and cut down a tree, but as the sun began to set, I started hearing some of the creepiest noises I've ever heard in Minecraft. Then I saw my first creaking. It actually led me to a creaking heart, which I dumbly destroyed without using Silk Touch, but luckily I found another one and collected it properly this time. I think 1 creaking heart is all I need to build a resin farm, so rather than push my luck, I decided to go to sleep because honestly, this place is kind of terrifying. Before I left though, I cut down more trees and gathered a fair amount of saplings so that we can grow more pale oak trees at our base. Speaking of our base, that's exactly where I want to go next since my inventory is absolutely jam-packed with resources right now. I'm close to 10,000 blocks away from home right now though, so this might take a while. 30 minutes later, and by the power of editing, I've finally arrived back at our base. After putting away my items, I finally made the sticky pistons, which was the whole point of the trip in the first place. Before getting started on the moss farms, I decided to do a bit of enchanting since I had 33 levels. I first tried enchanting my boots, hoping for feather falling. Instead, I got protection 4, depth strider 3, and unbreaking 3. Still determined, I made another pair of boots and gave it another shot. This time, I only got protection 3 and unbreaking 3. Oh well, we can try again once we have more XP. Anyway, we've got all the materials for the farms, so let's not waste any more time and get straight to building. Heading inside the windmill, I started by replacing the floor with dark oak and then built a staircase leading underground where we'll be setting up the actual moss farms. After digging out a pretty big space, I was finally ready to get building. I started with the pale moss farm, and since I'm a total redstone noob, I followed a tutorial by Basic Redstone to get everything set up. Once all the redstone was in place and working, I moved on to the regular moss farm. It's the exact same design as the first one, so it was pretty straightforward to build after already doing it once. And I don't know why, but there's just something so satisfying about watching these farms run with no issues. I'm super happy we've got these set up now, but the only problem is that it looks like absolute hot garbage down here, so let's get to decorating. I started by fixing up the floor and then added a pillar for some extra support. To make things more convenient, I also extended the redstone all the way to the pillar so I can easily turn the farm on and off from there. Next, I started patching up all of the walls with stone blocks. It's a simple design, but for an underground farm, I think it works just fine. To add some detail, I used moss blocks as accents on the wall, which gave the room a more natural look. I also added a dark oak trim around the ceiling to give the space more structure. Since I liked how the moss accents were turning out, I extended them to the ceiling as well. We had an open space on the back wall, so I built a simple bone meal farm so that we have the option to convert any extra moss into bone meal. After detailing the main entrance and adding a few final touches, here's a look at the fully completed farm. I'm really glad everything came together without any technical redstone issues. We can easily turn the farms on and off with the flick of a lever, and everything runs super smoothly. To celebrate finishing our first build of this episode, let's go check in on my cats. If you don't know by now, this is how I guilt trip all of you into liking the video. But seriously, taking a second to like the video is the biggest way to support this channel, so I really do appreciate it. Getting back to Minecraft, the next thing I want to build is a horse stable to help fill the gap in between the windmill and the rest of our builds. I'm a little bit low on resources though, so I went down into our mine and gathered a couple stacks of andesite. After that, I went deeper underground to mine some tough blocks. While I was doing so, a zombie fell down from a nearby cave, and since he picked up a block, I decided to trap him since he won't despawn. I'm planning to build a villager trading hall later in this video, so having a zombie ready will help with getting cheaper trades. After that little distraction, I mined a few more stacks of tuff and made my way back to the surface. Back at our house, I started crafting all the different blocks we'll need for the stable. After about 10 minutes of crafting, I headed over to the moss farm to grab some pale moss, the last item on the list. Luckily, we've got a huge stockpile of it now. And with that, we should have everything we need to build the horse stable. Getting straight to building, I created the walls using a gradient of tuff, pale moss, andesite, diorite, and calcite. and to challenge myself a little bit, I created the stable on a diagonal. This made it feel quite a bit trickier, but it should make the area feel a lot more dynamic in the end. For the roof, I went for a simple combination of deep slate bricks and tiles. To bring some color to the area, I built 2 large hay bales beside the barn, and then I also added some flowers and azaleas for a lush vibe. On the other side of the stable, I created a large patch of rose bushes. After that, I added a few hanging lanterns to light up the area, and then I also placed a bit of glow lichen inside to further ensure no hostile mobs will spawn. Last but not least, I connected the stable to our pathway system to fully integrate it into the area. I even used a bit of the rooted dirt we found in the lush cave to add additional texture variation. The stable is looking pretty awesome now, but we're still missing something pretty important, the actual horses. I only have 2 saddles, so let's go find a couple new friends. The first horse I tamed ended up being pretty slow, so I tried my luck with a second one. This one was much faster, so I brought him back to the stable and even gave him some diamond horse armor. I went out and got a second horse, and after bringing this one home, I gave it some gold armor. It's super fun seeing the stable finally come to life with some horses. Now that the stable is finished, I want to get to work on a villager trading hall. Considering this is hardcore, upgrading our tools and armor is super important, so I think this is the next best step in our progression. Step 1 is going to be setting up a villager breeder. Luckily, it doesn't really require too many resources, so it was pretty easy to build. The real challenge is going to be getting the first 2 villagers inside. Fortunately, there's a village a couple hundred blocks away, so I used rails to slowly push them over. I was moving 2 villagers at once, but of course, right when I was almost at the breeder, a zombie showed up and converted one into a zombie. I considered curing it, but I figured it would just be easier to bring another one over. So after getting the first villager into the breeder, I went back to the village and made the trip once again with a brand new one. Finally, after getting both villagers inside, I gave them some potatoes, and to my delight, it seems like it's working. Some hearts appeared and a baby villager spawned. I want to make a trading hall with 20 villagers, so while we wait for more babies, let's get started on gathering all the materials we're going to need to build it. The first thing I crafted was some blocks of copper, which I placed outside so they could start aging. I'm aiming for the second stage of oxidation, so as soon as any reach that point, I'll need to wax them before they age any further. While we wait for the rest to age, I planted some spruce, dark oak, and jungle trees, which I grew right away using some bone meal. I then spent a few minutes cutting down all of the trees. After collecting more of the copper that was ready, I used bone meal to make some glow lichen, which I then collected with my shears. Next, I took a trip down into the mine and gathered a few stacks of granite. I also stripped down a bunch of dark oak logs to make things easier later. We still needed some mangrove logs, so I grew a few mangrove trees with bone meal. And I'm not kidding, it took me over 20 minutes to chop down just 11 trees. Maybe it's just a skill issue, but these are such a pain to harvest. Anyway, at least we had enough copper blocks at this point, so I turned them into a full stack of cut copper. The final material we needed was light gray terracotta. Fortunately, there's a badlands biome just down the river, so I took a boat over and gathered a few stacks before heading home. It took me almost 2 hours to get all of these materials, but we finally have every single item we need to build the villager trading hall. I started by flattening the area a little bit since it's on a slope, then got to work building up the walls. I used primarily stone and tuff blocks, and then brought in some color in the form of granite, oak, light gray terracotta, and copper. For the roof, I used a mix of spruce, dark oak, and mangrove. I created some windows using scaffolding and added a bit of a natural touch using dark oak saplings in flower pots. To finish the outside of the trading hall, I placed in a couple of lanterns to light up the entrance, as well as a few rose bushes for a pop of color. Last but not least, I extended our pathway over to the build using coarse dirt. I'm honestly in love with how this build turned out. I think it fits the area perfectly. I'm eager to get started on the interior, but before we do, I made a quick trip to the nether to gather up a bit of glowstone. With that in hand, I got started on the inside of the villager trading hall by building a spruce wood floor in the center of the room. Next, I mapped out where each villager would go using pieces of glowstone. Once I had that figured out, I filled in the rest of the floor with polished tuff. I then built up pillars using stripped dark oak in order to create stalls for each of the villagers. After adding a few more details, I felt like the first half of the room was looking pretty good, so I created a red rug in the center of the floor. Once that was finished, I mirrored the same villager stall design we just built on the other side of the room. When nightfall approached, instead of sleeping, I went outside and farmed spiders for string. After gathering a bit, I combined it with some beeswax to craft some candles. With those ready, I got to work building a chandelier hanging from the center of the ceiling. And after adding a few final touches, here's a look at the completed interior of the villager trading hall. All we need to do now is add the actual villagers, so let's go check in on our villager breeder. By the looks of it, we've got a ton of villagers now, which is absolutely perfect. Before moving them into the trading hall, I first want to turn them into zombie villagers and then cure them using weakness potions and golden apples so that their trades will be cheaper. I don't have enough gold for the apples though, so it's time for a mining trip. While my main focus was gathering gold, I also picked up some diamonds, iron, and any other valuable resources that I came across. I even stumbled upon a mineshaft and zombie spawner, so I looted both while I had the chance. There were even some name tags in some of the chests, which is absolutely awesome since we can finally name the cats that we found in the first episode. I also grabbed a bunch of the rails from the mineshaft, which will save us some iron later on. After about half an hour of mining, I felt like I had enough gold, so I made my way back to the surface. And after organizing my items, here's a look at all the resources we gathered from our adventure. Now that we have everything we need, I got to work building a zombie villager converter. We're going to need a normal zombie to build it, but thanks to my 200 IQ planning, I already have one trapped down in the mine from earlier. It's also really nice that this one has a helmet on it, since we don't have to worry about it burning in the sun. After bringing the zombie all the way over, I finished building the converter. And since I'm a noob at technical stuff like this, I followed a tutorial by Chapman Farms. The cool thing about this design is that we can cure 9 villagers at the same time, which will save us a lot of potions. Speaking of potions, we still need to brew those, so I ran over to the house and made some splash potions of weakness. After placing the potions in a dispenser, all we have to do is press this button and then give each of the zombie villagers a golden apple. After waiting a few minutes, they started turning back into normal villagers. Once we give them their professions, their trades should hopefully be a lot cheaper. Once all of the villagers converted back to normal, I moved them into the trading hall using a railway system. With all of the villagers in place, I repeated the same process 2 more times until every single stall in our trading hall was filled. Since we don't need the railway system anymore, I removed it, and then got to work crafting all of the different workstations for the villagers. After that, I harvested all of the sugarcane from the farm behind our house. After collecting it all, I turned it into some paper, which we should be able to trade with some of our villagers. Another item we can trade is wheat, so I took a minute to harvest our wheat farm. And because I'm a good farmer, I of course replanted everything. I then went inside of the trading hall and placed down the workstations we made in order to give the villagers their professions. If you're curious, these are all of the different villagers I decided to get. 7 out of 20 of the villagers are going to be librarians, as it's such a great way to get access to super useful enchanted books such as mending. And because we converted all of the villagers, their trades are really cheap. After that, I kept trading with all of the villagers, working to level them up and unlock better deals. We can now get diamond tools and armor for just a single emerald, which is honestly pretty broken. I also continued rerolling trades with the librarians, since a few still didn't have great deals yet. It's a little mind-numbing breaking and replacing the lectern over and over again, but I eventually got all of the books that I wanted, like Feather Falling 4 and Protection 4. Now that we have a bunch of enchanted books and fresh armor, I began combining everything to upgrade our gear. We now have Protection 4 on all of our armor, which is absolutely incredible, and our tools are looking a lot better too. I still do need to add mending to everything, but I ran out of XP. We've been doing a lot of grinding, so I think it's finally time to get back to some building. I first planted a large spruce tree, and then collected the podzol with my shovel since I now have Silk Touch on it. I then went down to the dock area, as I want to build a sweet berry farm in this open section. I got started by placing down podzol in rows, and then surrounded them with pale oak trapdoors, which creates a really cool planter box effect. After that, all I had to do was plant the actual sweet berries. It's a simple design, but I think it added a lot of life to this area. While I was down near the water, I created a small algae effect along the shoreline using oak leaves, moss blocks, and short grass. I love how lush this made the area look, so I extended the same design further along the water's edge, closer to our trading hall and windmill. I want to transform the cliffside later because it looks pretty bad, but right now I want to focus on expanding our wheat farm. I first built up the area a little bit and then removed all of the short grass. After that, I added some water sources, which I covered using dark oak slabs, polished deep slate walls, and lanterns. I then tilled the ground to mark out where I wanted the expansion to go. To get some seeds, I did a big harvest of the existing wheat farm, and after replanting, I was able to get the entire larger farm filled in. I seriously love farms so much that I got to work building another one in between our villager trading hall and Windmill. This one was a bit trickier since it's on a slope, but that actually worked out in my favor since I was able to hide most of the water sources. Since we don't have a carrot farm yet, this felt like the perfect opportunity to start one. It's kind of embarrassing, but I only have a single carrot to my name, so I went down to the moss farm and grabbed some bone meal. I then used it to quickly grow the carrots, which I then harvested with my fortune pickaxe. This gave me a decent amount back, and I was able to get at least a small chunk filled in. We can keep expanding it later, but for now, I'm happy to call the farm done. In preparation to do some terraforming, I went down into the mine and gathered a few stacks of andesite. After that, I went over to the windmill and grabbed some pale moss blocks. I'm also going to need a decent amount of podzol, so I planted a couple of large spruce trees and collected all of the podzol that generated. Before using these blocks to build up some custom terrain though, I first want to remove a bunch of blocks, so I got to digging. I'm not super in love with how the area behind our new buildings are looking, so I'm simply trying to smooth it out and get the hill looking a bit more natural. The only annoying part about it was that there were some sections of stone that I had to remove and then replace with grass, but besides that, it was a pretty straightforward project. It's not the biggest change ever, but here's a look at the before and after. I want to terraform the cliffside next, but before we get to that, let's take a minute to harvest all of the carrots and expand the farm. I was almost able to fill in the entire thing, but not quite. Anyway, let's finally get started on terraforming the cliff. I created large boulders using tons of different gray blocks like stone, tuff, acacia logs, pale moss, mossy cobblestone, regular cobblestone, andesite, and even some coal ore blocks. I almost just passed out saying all of that, but combining all of these blocks creates a really cool effect, which I love. My plan for this area is to create a vineyard of sorts, so I placed strips of coarse dirt and podzol to help divide up the different rows. Before we can build the actual vineyard though, I need a few materials, so I first went down to our sweet berry farm and collected all of the berries. After that, I took a quick detour to check in on our carrot farm again, and I was able to get the entire thing filled in, which is great. I then went down into the moss farm and grabbed all of the bone meal that was in there. Using the bone meal, I grew a few large jungle trees and then collected all of the leaves using shears. While I was at it, I also gathered some spruce as well as oak and birch leaves. The last item we should need for the vineyard is shortgrass, so I used my shears to gather a bit up as well. Now that we have all the resources we need, I got straight to building. I created the main bushes out of primarily jungle leaves, with just a bit of oak and birch leaves mixed in for some texture variation. Then to really sell the vineyard look, I dotted some sweet berries around the leaves, as well as a few extra details like shortgrass, ferns, and even some spruce fences, which I think look like branches. There was still an area at the bottom of the cliff that looked a bit empty though, so I decided to add my first custom trees in this world. I went for some small spruce trees, which I think helped fill out the space perfectly. All this terraforming has completely transformed the area around our new builds. I want to tour everything we've built at the end of the episode, so to make sure everything looks as good as possible, I went around adding small details like extra texture variation in the pathways, a few flower patches, and some short grass to fill in any remaining empty spaces around our builds. After that, I went down to our super smelter and broke all of the furnaces since they should all have a bunch of XP stored up inside of them. Fortunately they did since I was down to 1 level beforehand, but anyways, after putting away my items in the storage room and organizing my inventory, I think we're finally ready to tour the world. I figured we'd start the tour on the dock like we did in the first episode, but anyways, you can see all of our new builds kind of peeking over the cliffside there. But before we take a look at that, we of course have our sweet berry farm. I'm really glad we added this to the area, as before there was nothing really here and it felt pretty boring, and it was also the perfect opportunity to use the pale oak that we found. We of course have our nether portal and mine entrance down here as well, but let's head up the stairs and into our starter house, as now that we have some name tags, I actually want to just take a minute to quickly name the cats that we found in the first episode. Thank you all so much for all the great suggestions. The ones that I chose were Asteroid Destroyer, as I felt like that was just too awesome to pass up. The next one here we're gonna call Kirby. And the third one we're gonna call Bacon, which is super cute, but also kind of makes me hungry, to be honest. So let's go find those cats. So I think the one behind the house we're gonna call Bacon. Where's that guy? Okay, yeah, here. Boom, Bacon. In front of our house we also have a cat, and this one is going to be, that's right, Asteroid Destroyer. This one by our barn we're gonna call Kirby, which is super awesome, makes me think of Smash Bros. But anyways, you protect us, protect our cows in there and our little sheep. Alright, you got it, Kirby. No creepers anywhere near here. Got it? Shake yes. Shake yes. Alright, close enough. While we're in our house, I also just want to take a minute to update the map. You can see this is what it was looking like at the end of episode 1. So let's grab this map here and take a look at it. And yeah, you can see all of our new stuff on there. The vineyard honestly looks so awesome. So let's just throw that back there. You can see, yeah, we cleared a lot of trees. Deforestation was a bit of an issue this episode, but let's throw that there. We'll update this one as well. Boom, and update that as well. And we can just throw that there, boom. But anyways, you can see our island is really shaping up. We probably have like a quarter of it filled now, but I'm seriously just so excited to keep working on it and to get the entire island transformed. But anyways, enough yapping, let's go take a look at all of the new stuff that we built in this episode. Heading further along the path, we of course have our wheat farm that we further expanded kind of along the cliffside. But this leads us over to our stable, which was honestly such a fun one to put together. I don't often build on diagonals, but I'm pretty happy with how this one came out actually. One of the things I love about this stable is that the horses can't get through this gap on their own. Like if we attract them with a golden carrot, you can see their AI just kind of makes them get stuck right there in the gap. But if we hop on the horse, we can easily just come out as well as in. So it's really easy to just grab a horse and go on an adventure and not worry about them escaping without any gates or anything like that. Right next to our stable, we of course have our villager trading hall, and honestly, I think this is one of my favorite block palettes that I've ever used. I think it's pretty unique, but everything just worked really well together somehow. But of course, heading inside is where the actual important part is, as this is where all of our villagers are hanging out. I'm really happy with how the interior turned out on this one. I especially love this kind of copper beam on the ceiling with the chandelier hanging off of it. I think it just created this really moody vibe, which I really love. Heading further past the villager trading hall, we of course have our windmill, but before we get to that, let's take a look at the carrot farm that we have here. I'm really glad that we added this in, as it just added a really nice pop of color and greenery to the area. And then going for that same vibe on this side, we of course have our vineyard, which also just added a really nice pop of color and interest to the area that it otherwise just wouldn't have. And we also have a nice little view of our custom trees from here. I definitely want to add more custom trees to the island, so that's something that I'm gonna work on. Last but not least, let's check out our windmill. I think this thing turned out really cool. I especially love the trim there with the lecterns, and then of course just the actual windmill blades turned out really awesome. But let's go check out inside, as that's where the important part is. I knew I wanted to build a windmill, but I also wanted to give it some functionality, so I thought having a moss farm down here would be the perfect solution. And this thing honestly turned out so cool with like the pale moss on this side and the regular moss on this side. I'll quickly just show you how the farm works. So if we flick this lever here, moss is going to start producing, and then water comes from behind those trapdoors and pushes all of it into these hoppers, which puts it into these chests. And then we of course have the option to take any extra moss and put it inside of our bone meal farm, which is honestly just super convenient to have right here inside of our moss farm. Just got to make sure I shut the farm off before we leave so that it doesn't break. But with that, I think we've covered everything that we've built in this episode. And of course it's raining now, which always seems to happen when I'm doing these tours. But anyways, let me know what you think I should add to the rest of the island, as I'm honestly just so excited to fully transform the entire thing. Thank you so much for watching the second episode of my hardcore Let's Play series. As always, the world to download is available on my Patreon if you want to explore this world for yourself. Thank you so much for watching, and happy building!